Grazie, Onorevole Canti. Thank you, Minister Canti. Now I give the floor to Mr. Tommaso Rossini, Captain of the Castle of San Marino.
Hello. Distinguished guests, welcome. It's a real pleasure to host you in San Marino for this 83rd session of the UNECE, for this important event. Here, he begins to build the city with the same stone which it has made our mountain. And so the people of San Marino continue to do in the years to come. They built the 3 watchtowers, which date back to the 13th and 14th centuries. With the stone they excaved from the mountain, and so they do for the 3 city walls, completed in the 16th century. In San Marino, they build using what is the main resource, the stone, and making full use of the land and the surrounding environment. They make the most of the promontories and the height difference that have always protected us from invasion and attacks by enemy. However, the people of San Marino not only had to defend themselves. Of public and private buildings, more systems are discovered. This system of collecting and transporting water was not limited to the city, but reached as far as the countryside, and this was the case until the 1960s. Other examples of renovation architecture are certainly the towers of the 3rd city wall that feature sharp angles and unique design. We owe this design to a San Marino man who distinguished himself as a military engineer at the court of Cosimo de' Medici, Giovan Battista Balluzzi, known by everyone as il San Marino. Those were years of wars and attempted invasion for the city of San Marino, and the San Marinese wrote to him and asked to design a wall that would keep enemies out. He never returned to San Marino, but thanks to the epistolary exchange of plan on driving, the people of San Marino were able to build a wall that would defend them for years to come. We can find one of the most important examples in the corner of the Titan Theater. With the Italian Risorgimento, even in San Marino, there was a desire for renewal and a desire to be part of a phenomenon that was invading all of Italy. In the 19th century, the new Basilica by the Bolognese architect Antonio Serra and the new Palazzo Pubblico by the Roman architect Francesco Azzurri were rebuilt. 2 works that also changed the appearance of the square in front of them, and still represent 2 of the most important monuments to our history. Other examples of innovative design can be found in the reconstruction of the city by engineer Gino Zani. In the 1930s, the city was rebuilt. The city walls and the 3 towers are renovated. These no longer had 2 defensive function for which they were designed. So the intent is to give the city a more modern appearance. Example of an innovative architecture in San Marino continued into the second half of the 20th century. A prime example is the shrine of Our Lady of Consolation in Borgo Maggiore by a Florentine architect Giovanni Michelucci. However, in those years of cultural and even economic rebuild, the country also moved in terms of reforms. Among the most important, which was school reforms. This needed new facilities to accommodate the many elementary school pupils. And in this phase, an innovative school building began, designed to meet the growth needs of children, a school on their scale. Among the most significant examples are the Cacaccio in San Marino City and the Hausa Park in Dogano Primary School. Architecture in San Marino continues, and over the years, several world-class architects have been working in our territory. Here, we cannot fail to mention Sir Norman Foster with the WTC and Stefano Boeri, who signed the new master plan. I want to make this historical excursus because I believe that San Marino has the right requirements to host this important event today. an event that will mark the guidelines for the design of building for the coming years. I hope that San Marino, first, will be able to seize this fundamental opportunity to become a beacon and example for the other countries. For its small size, San Marino can also be an excellent example for the city. Therefore, what we are called upon to do is to put the right tools in the hands of professionals and trust their abilities to build a sustainable future at the same time to forge a relationship with our neighboring municipalities so that the development and protection of the territory can be shared as much as possible. We live in a time where we can no longer allow private interest to take precedence over public interest. We must strongly oppose inequities, defend everyone's rights for a free and dignified life. We cannot allow the great and rich of the earth to decide our future and that of the new generation. We must be able to resist temptation and maintain our consistency and fundamental principles. We can no longer delay. It's time to take our future and especially that of our children into our own hands and govern it in the best possible way, in a disinterested and fair-sighted manner, and exclude those with interest in speculation and personal enrichment for any international forum. I strongly hope that this day can be an inspiration to many of us and that we can arrive at a charter that will lead us to a better future. I wish everyone who attend a pleasant stay in our small and ancient republic. Thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you, Mr. Rossini. Now I give the floor to Ms. Olga Algayerova, Executive Secretary of the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Excellencies, Ministers, Captain of Castle, distinguished Lord Norman Foster, distinguished Special Envoy to the UN Secretary General, my dear friend Jean Todt, friends and colleagues, it's a great pleasure and honor for me to welcome all of you to the 83rd session of the UNECE Committee on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management on my first working visit to this beautiful country. I would like to take this opportunity to thank the government of the Republic of San Marino for so generously hosting and closely cooperating with our committee. I'm particularly grateful to Minister Canti and Ambassador Beccari, I don't see him now, okay, thank you, for making this session possible. It is just thanks to their vision and commitment that we are here today. The year 2022 marks the 75 years since UNECE was established. Over many decades, we have jointly built a strong track record of impactful collaboration across our region to address our common challenges. And till today, UNECE continues to focus on helping our member states to design and implement people-centered policies and initiatives that leave no one behind. Sustainable housing, land management and urban development are of great importance as they constitute fundamental cornerstones for achieving the SDGs. Without them, no inclusive development is possible. This year's session, ladies and gentlemen, is the culmination of extensive collaboration with our member states and local, regional and central governments to consolidate these three cornerstones. One of the results of this collaboration is the San Marino Declaration on Principles for Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Design and Architecture in support of sustainable, safe, healthy, socially inclusive, climate neutral and circular homes, urban infrastructure and cities. So that is the name, but very much of substance in it. This declaration provides a practical tool for enabling the realization of the vision of the United Nations Secretary General of a stronger, more networked and inclusive multilateral system anchored within the United Nations. And this declaration was developed by the Bureau of the Committee with contributions from practitioners and the support of the Secretariat to increase the contribution of practitioners in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development. Moreover, this session will deliberate on the objectives, format and frequency of the Forum of Mayors, which has provided throughout its first and second edition a flexible mechanism for ensuring a coherent approach to urbanism, one that involves the local, regional and global levels in a new multilateralism that leaves no one behind. Concluding, friends and colleagues, we meet today at a critical time in the history of this important and dynamic UNECE region. During the past year, we have been witnessing the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now we witness the war in Ukraine and the rising energy food prices. Cities have been at the center of emergency response efforts. Their experiences are important to highlight, as well as their views and long-term needs for achieving sustained urbanism. We will be hearing during these days from leaders of cities and practitioners on how best to address these complex crises that are further deepened by climate change. Local, regional, and central governments across the UNECE region have found creative solutions to face these difficult challenges these complex crises have created. This session is also about highlighting those solutions as well as supporting joint efforts and namely our collaboration. I would like to take this opportunity to thank each and every one of you for accepting our invitation to participate in the discussions and for your willingness to dedicate your expertise to make this event a joint success. I wish you a most successful, fruitful discussions over the next 3 days and all the best. Madam Chair, back to you, please.
Thank you, Ms. Algayerova, and thank you all the speakers for your great messages and information that you shared with us. Now I pass to the formality of this part of the session, the adoption of the agenda of the session, which I would like to remind you, you can find it in the document ECE/HBP/212/Rev.1. And I would like to ask the delegates if you have any comment or suggestion, or would you like to make any amendment to the agenda?
I'll switch the order. Tomorrow morning we switch the order of the agenda.
I will have that. Yeah, I will say, yeah. So I don't see from the room, but I know that the Secretariat has a suggestion and a proposal to make, to change the agenda for tomorrow.
So how is what you are going?
Okay, I see France has the plate. Yes, please.
Very sorry that I take the floor before the Secretariat. I would like, first of all, since it's the first time I take the floor here, I would like to thank all the ministers and the authorities from San Marino for their welcome. Thank you, Secretariat, for all the organization, and thank all persons, all distinguished personalities and delegates from countries and other institutions that came to this meeting. However, I was said that among these delegates, some would not be able to be present in the last days of these meetings. And I see that there is the item on elections at the end. I think it's on October the 6th. So France would suggest to put forward this item of the agenda and to have elections tomorrow morning or tomorrow or possibly tomorrow morning, for instance, if this suits to other participants and the organizers, of course. Thank you very much.
Thank you, France, for your proposal. If there is not any proposal further or any against this proposal, then we accept these changes in the agenda. And I know that also the Secretariat has a proposal for to change the agenda item 6 and to discuss it, the agenda of the which is planned for October 4th with agenda item 5. So it means switching the agenda item 6 with agenda item 5, report on the outcomes of the second in focus SDG 11 roundtable and recommendations. And this way we will have a bit more time to discuss tomorrow on the report on the Forum of Mayors. Do you agree with this amendment to the agenda? Okay, I don't see any against that. So in that case, we have some amendments to the agenda as below. A decision, the committee adopt the agenda of its 83rd session in document ECE/HBP/212/Rev.1 with the following changes. Agenda item 6, report on the outcomes of the second Forum of Mayors and related recommendations will be discussed on Tuesday, 4 October from 9:30 till 11. Agenda item 5, report on the outcomes of the second in focus SDG 11 will be discussed on Tuesday, 4 October from 11 till 11:30. Agenda item 20, as it was proposed by Delegate on Urban Planning for Climate Neutral and Circular Homes and Cities. The relevant document for this agenda item is ECE/HBP/2021/2 and ECE/HBP/2022/2. Apologize for all these complicated names of the documents. And I follow the information. The San Marino Declaration on Principle for Sustainable and Inclusive Urban Design and Architecture in support of sustainable, safe, healthy, socially inclusive, climate neutral and circular homes, urban infrastructure and cities was developed by the Bureau of the Committee, as it was already mentioned, on Urban Development, Housing and Land Management with the support of the Secretariat to continue to the realization of the vision of the United Nations Secretary General of a stronger, more networked and inclusive multilateral system anchored within the United Nations. The declaration also responds to the call of the President of the General Assembly Advisory Committee on Sustainable Urbanization, stressing that implementing the new urban agenda requires the large-scale mobilization of millions of architects, planners, surveyors, and valuers, and real estate professionals. It is with great pleasure that I open the panel discussion of architects and planners on urban planning for climate neutral and circular homes and cities. And I'll be also part of this panel. I think that this is the arrangement of the panel. So, yeah. Paola?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And indeed, this time we ask you to be part of the panel. We would like to have your opinion as a panelist, as not as chair, so I'll be moderating this event. Before I pass it on to the speakers, just a curiosity, because we talk a lot about architecture here in this session, and I know there's a lot of interest, and I would like to know how many of you are architects, and raise your hand. All right, so a good number. I was expecting a bit more, but probably that they will join us later and probably also tomorrow. But it's interesting to have finally the practitioners in the room having a discussion on something that the UN is expected to adopt today, this declaration. And this is why we wanted to have this panel to understand, is a UN document just a mouthful, or is something that architects, practitioners, so not governments, not even local authorities, but individuals are going to implement in their own work? Because when we talk about sustainability, we can agree a lot at the international level, at the political level, but at the end of the day is who changes the land, who builds, who changes the territory that makes the difference, who designs, whether it does it in a circular way or linear way. So we are turning actually a little bit now the powers around and say, okay, maybe those who really have powers are those who design the world, who design buildings, who design bridges, who design infrastructure. So I don't think I need to introduce my panel because you all know it, but let me just do it for the sake of it. To my left, and you know him already, has been leading the Forum of Mayors with the UN already for 2 years in 2020 and 2022, is architect Norman Foster. Lord Foster knows everything about our work, has been also participating in the drafting of this declaration, and he will give us a keynote speech, which I have the pleasure to have a look at already, and there's a lot of food for thought. Based on that, then we will have an eminent panel composed of our special envoy on road safety, Jean Todt, also very well known in this part of the world as well for his previous life, but in the rest of the world for his current work. SDG 11 has a specific goal on road safety, and it's very, very important when we talk about planning cities. We remember also that is how we plan cities that can save lives, and Jean is here to remind us of this. To his right is architect Stefano Boeri. It's really a pleasure for me because Stefano doesn't remember, but it was one of his students back in the time. And, we were, and I don't say how much back in the time, okay? That I will save it for both of us. But it's really a privilege to have you here. And Stefano has also been doing a lot in terms of sustainability. We will hear from him also how he takes this declaration. And to his right is Susan Aitken, that we know from Glasgow. She's the mayor of Glasgow. I will not say that how the mayor is called in Scotland, but you're the mayor of Glasgow. Susan has been doing a lot in a very practical way in her city, including hosting a big climate COP and taking responsibility for a lot of climate action. So it's very important also she tells us how she sees this declaration for practitioners. And last but definitely not least is our chair, because our chair has been involved for many years in the work of a ministry, and we also want to learn from her. How is the ministry taking such a document, and how is she going to use it and implement it in the future? So without further ado, I'll give it to my, I can say, friend, Norman Foster. Lord Foster will give us the keynote speech. I'm here in case of any trouble. Hopefully technicians are ready, so we should be able to go. Over to you, Norman.
In Athens, physicians undertook an oath to uphold ethical standards. And in the city, the citizens vowed that they would leave the city better when they left it than when they found it. So really, it's in that very same spirit that I'm delighted to be here to help launch the United Nations Declaration of San Marino and its principles. It's difficult to summarize quite a large document, but it's about sustainable spaces, it's about inclusive values, it's about planning, urban design, architecture, a holistic view of infrastructure, and in the end, our cities. It starts with our homes. Homes for all, ideally affordable. I really don't like the word affordable. I think essential is much more realistic. Realistic in terms of those who look after our communities, our public spaces, perhaps the professions that we dangerously take for granted. And in the end, it really comes down to cities, because urban living is the new norm. It's almost a cliche, but it's worth repeating that cities develop 80% of our wealth, but they also are responsible for 60% of global emissions. And if we look far ahead to 2050, and we look at the implications of population growth, then we're talking about the equivalent of building another Rome every 3.5 weeks. So the Declaration and its principles is not just about retrofitting those cities that we take for granted, it's about helping to create those which are still to be realized in the future. So, if we're talking about a population increase estimated by another 2.5 billion people on the planet, then 90% of that urban growth will happen in Africa and Asia. And if we consider just Mumbai, then again, another estimate, by 2050, 80% of the infrastructure is yet to be built. And if we look at Africa and the issue of energy, 600 million people do not have access to electricity, and 1/6 of those live in Nigeria. And Nigeria estimates that to cope with population growth and to industrialize, it will need 15 times the amount of energy that it presently consumes. So clean energy is very much at the forefront of the Declaration. Climate neutrality, the importance of recycling, and recycling not just materials, so considering when we build a building, to what extent are the materials recyclable? Can we recycle waste to energy? Of course we can. Recycling a building. So recycling in a very broad context. And in the words of the Declaration, working with nature and natural systems towards social equality. I've lost it. No, I'm back. And at the same time, considering the importance, the quality of urban living. And in terms of equality, it's worth a reminder that 14% of humanity, more than 1 billion people, do not have access to electricity in combination, water, clean water, and modern sanitation. And this image here is a reminder that 10 million people die of poor air quality every year. Many of those children from the burning of fossil fuel, whether that's wood, animal waste, coal for heating, for cooking. And so really the Declaration is in essence a manifesto for a global future in a time of climate warming, of rising sea levels, and it's linked to the Development Goals, the SDGs. And those SDGs and this declaration are very much at the heart of the foundation, the Norman Foster Foundation in Madrid, which is a United Nations Center of Excellence, and very much about training, about educating younger generations, the civic leaders of the future, to anticipate the future. And it was really in that capacity that I was asked by the Secretary General to address the General Assembly in New York on the importance of master planning. And the brief that I was given was to talk on behalf of the design professions and to draw attention to the valuable role, their importance in the whole world of master planning, urban design. And in that same spirit, I was asked today to share some of my experiences over some 6 decades, a little more in fact, working together with colleagues, with civic leaders, with communities, and perhaps to illustrate the relationship between perhaps a dry word like master planning, urban design, and to try to bring that to life. And I start with a project in Duisburg, which is at the confluence, the convergence of the Rhine and Ruhr valleys. And that, like so many cities, communities in the past, was vibrant, wealthy, prosperous center of industry. And like so many Rust Belt communities, was facing the challenge of the decline of those traditional industries which had moved elsewhere. So in the 1980s, when we came to Duisburg, then it was really just a rundown city, looking to literally reinvent itself. And this is a model of the master plan at that time. This must be about 1988. And it focused on the inner harbor, which at the time, in its heyday, was the largest inland waterway in the world. So the focus is very much on that waterway and the areas which grow out of it. So many activities in parallel, working with the community, the civic leaders, and creating buildings for a new kind of industry, the high-tech, cleaner industries, electronics. And from the start, integrating that, and this is the 1980s, with bicycle lanes, with the importance of green landscaping, and inserting new infrastructure. And we'll talk a little about the importance of infrastructure, but here you can see the beginning of a network of canals that emanate from that waterway and provide the setting for new rental housing, affordable housing, very high quality. This is just a glimpse of the housing off that canal, waterway, with outdoor terraces, and again, setting a new standard in terms of residential, coupling that with green spaces. This was probably taken in the early 90s, so almost certainly it's matured and grown over time. And bringing the river back to a new kind of life for a new industry, tourists, for riverboat expeditions. Again, one of many small projects over several decades. In the background, a historic bridge, and then damming the main body of water to create a kind of inland lake for sailing, for regattas, and the old industrial buildings reborn as museums, as places of culture. So if that is about the bigger picture of master planning, then at the smaller scale, if the master plan is something you look down on from above, then urban design is very much at the smaller scale, the quality of life as a pedestrian. This is just a glimpse. The circle there is Trafalgar Square and was part of a larger study of central London, of a historic core. And literally, if you look down on Trafalgar Square in the 90s, which was literally the heart of the nation, because every sign of a distance from London would be measured from this spot. And what you can see is really one big traffic roundabout. And the big move here had big implications, but the change was arguably quite small in its extent, was literally to close the road to the north, the setting for historic buildings, the National Gallery, and pedestrianize it. At the time that we undertook this study, it was really dangerous. Here you can see one of the team dodging the traffic, and then pedestrian traffic was literally held in a steel pen. So it was not only disagreeable, it was also very, very dangerous. And this is how it was before, and that same view after the closing of the road, the pedestrianization, one of several moves. So a very dramatic change. And the heart of Trafalgar Square was normally dominated by pigeons and one or two tourists, and this is how it looked prior to that transformation. And opening that up, creating steps, bringing the heart of that space to the historic buildings. And it's now known very much as the kind of living room of London, and it's almost an outdoor theatre. It hosts all kinds of popular events, cultural events, the setting for sculpture, for art installations. And if we tried, it coincided with a move to create the control of traffic with congestion charges. But statistically, the number of pedestrian movements multiplied in that area by a factor of 13. To actually cross the space is now half the time that it took before when it was a traffic roundabout. The congestion, 30% reduction in traffic, measurable carbon dioxide emissions, over 16% less, and through the congestion charges, an annual input into public transport of something like 122 million. The application of those similar principles to the old port of Marseille, and here perhaps a little difficult to comprehend, but at the top it's almost totally roads, and the bottom after the transformation is essentially a pedestrian domain. So if we look at the image of the top as it was before, then those roads have been reduced. The clutter, the industrial wasteland has been transformed into spaces for terraces, for outdoor dining. And in this space is a kind of inhabited sculpture, which is a reflective kind of canopy, which is a focus for all kinds of social events and comings together. I've talked about spaces, but the way in which the infrastructure of connectivity in our cities, if we think about infrastructure as the urban glue that binds the individual buildings together, it's the boulevards, it's the bridges, it's the plazas. And here was an excerpt, this sketch for a competition for a pedestrian bridge that would have extreme social implications. It would, if it was realized at the time of the competition, would have brought together the traditionally richest community on the North Bank with the traditional poor community on the South. So it was highly controversial. I described it at the time of the competition as a blade of light, the most minimal intervention, given that it was being inserted into the historic core of the City of London on axis with St. Paul's. And here you can see that axis with St. Paul's, and you can see the opposite direction to Tate Modern. And the spin-off from this intervention was extraordinary. beyond everybody's expectation. This diagram is the result of a computer analysis before the bridge was inserted. And it's about connectivity. It's called space syntax. It's a way of measuring the pedestrian frequency and connection. And this was the prediction at the time of the competition of how a bridge would have a ripple effect way beyond the bridge itself. And again, the prediction was 4 million would cross. The reality was 8 million. The prediction was it would generate 1,500 jobs. It generated 3,000. There were no hotels in that area. There are now 60 hotels. And there's a kind of good news, bad news, because one consequence is that the property prices went up in values. But of course, another conversation about the affordability of key workers in the center, one of the issues that I started with earlier in this conversation. If we talk about recycling and heritage issues, then perhaps the Reichstag is emblematic of the rebirth of a nation, a divided Germany, reunified, a building with a somewhat dark past, bringing that to a new form of life. And as you can see there, this is after the competition, this is the realization, the public dome. Bringing the public into the political institution has created an enormously popular venue. More than 2 million visitors now every year ascending to the dome. The dome is part of the ecology of the building. So it's working to create a zero carbon, almost an energy manifesto, which of course in the early 90s was much more radical than it would be today, but still, again, also socially pioneering in that the public, with the consent of the politicians who of course enabled this to happen, look down symbolically on the politicians who are answerable to them. So this is very much a manifesto for energy, clean energy. It's virtually carbon-free. It uses vegetable oil in a cogenerator. It deposits water during the summer when it's hot in aquifers deep in underground to be reclaimed later. Photovoltaics. So really all the many devices. It's worth noting the standard ratings that give values to issues of sustainability. And there are many of them. Perhaps the most well-known are the American LEED and the European BREEAM. And desirable and important though these are, they really do not go far enough. They don't go into the issues of embodied carbon in the materials. They're a great start, but they need to go further. And pushing those boundaries, a recent project which is still being finished as a project does push beyond the codes. It goes way beyond the BREEAM, the LEED, and it was, interestingly, in its past, an industrial building that produced gas on the outskirts of Madrid. And the recycling of that building with internal mezzanines, and here you can see the building's finished, but it's not really in its final life. It is yet to be occupied. So these are very, very recent. And the creation of gardens which are open to the public, and of course when these trees mature, they will in turn be absorbing carbon dioxide. So this will be, in the end, a building which is climate restorative. But in that sense, it was presented at COP26. It is the most sustainable building that we have so far achieved. It's a one-planet building. But the ratings establish perhaps guidelines for the impact of the building in terms of the planet, but they don't address the importance of the health of the occupants. And I show here two projects. One is the headquarters for Bloomberg in London. Those fins on the outside enable the building to breathe. And breathing buildings that work with nature, that reduce energy and are healthier, is a theme that we have pioneered since the 1960s. And this building and the Apple campus in California are perhaps the two latest examples of that. And if I just look in detail a little on the Apple building, you can see these eyebrows here are acting as light shelves to reflect light deep into the heart of the building. They're also on some orientation shading, and they're also about the movement of air. So if you look at the head of that glass wall, it is encouraging the movement of air through to the heart of the building and discharged in the heart. And that's the eyebrow from the inside. And if I move into the building itself, then you can see that those reflectors are reflecting not just light, but the greenery of the landscape deep into the building. There's a side issue that I'd like to touch on, because there's a somewhat fashionable movement at the moment to decry buildings which use concrete as somehow not being climate neutral, being bad news in terms of the agenda of sustainability. Concrete is, after water, the second most used material on the planet. And there's very desirable research underway in reducing its carbon content. But it's also very much about how you use the material. It's not the material itself. If you look at this image, the underside, the ceiling, is not a suspended ceiling. It doesn't have big ducts moving air. It's not only holding up the building as a structure, it's actually helping to heat and control the temperature. So this is prefabricated in a factory, and embedded in that typical slab is not just the reinforcing bars that will hold the structure up, but also small bore piping, which will move hot or cold water to control the internal climate. The sum total of this is you get a building which is much smaller, so you reduce the amount of the external wall and the exposure to the climate. So these knock-on effects, and the fact that the finished material is the material itself, all add up to something which is really quite sustainable, especially when you take the recycling story into consideration. So a lot of that concrete was the crushed remains of the 24 separate buildings that occupied this site before, and 100% of that concrete has been recycled. So again, it's a wider picture. And then the landscaping, the planting, this is within the circle of the building, and it's interesting. The view from above is kind of gigantic. The view from below, the building almost disappears. It becomes internally almost a part of the horizon. And then from the outside, again, the restoration of the California landscape, the planting of 10,000 trees, which annually, absorbing 200 tons of carbon dioxide every year, adds up to a sustainability story. Now, the importance of research, it's very easy to postulate the idea that over a very deep building, you can make that building healthier by pulling fresh air, large volumes of it. But that's only been made possible by research, and this shows the test lab to do that. Elsewhere, in parallel, in Harvard, you have a research unit which creates test cubicles fed from below by a machine that can simulate the different climates, the climate of a sealed building, the climate of a building which is breathing, and These are scientific results that show the difference between a conventional building and a breathing building, two kinds of green buildings. But you can see that here, that the health for the occupants is actually measured. And perhaps that's the big difference between early practice and later practice. Research can stimulate innovation, and there are other ways of stimulating that. Perhaps the Solar Awards in Switzerland, which I was asked if I would involve myself, give my name, and over some years, the results have been quite extraordinary. You won't, this is an extract from their own publication, and you won't be able to read the fine print, but essentially, what it's demonstrating is each of these buildings is generating many times more the amount of energy that they need themselves. So the one on the left, 800%, moving over 700%, so 8 or 7 times feeding back electricity into the grid or charging electric cars. Now, a small but important point in passing, behind any of these initiatives, whether it's the research, whether it's the promotion of a solar program of prizes, whether it's a civic leader, whether it's an individual creating a corporate headquarters, whether it's a parliament, each of these projects have only been possible because there's been a champion. There's been somebody who's had the courage and the guts to back a judgment for change for the better. That can be a relatively, in our circles, unknown politician, unlike Helmut Kohl, Rita Zusmuth. She was the driving force behind the Reichstag, an individual behind the Millennium Bridge. In every case, and that perhaps brings us to the power of an architect. And I've been quoted as saying, truthfully, the architect has no power. I cannot tell anybody what to do as an architect, or my colleagues as a profession. Can't go on site and say, change that. Our only power is our advocacy, our ability to be able to transmit ideas, to communicate, to enthuse, to really open the perspective on the wider picture, whether that's sustainability, whether it's the values embodied in a declaration. And I'll end just really on Trafalgar Square, because Trafalgar Square would not have happened without the advocacy of a handful of architects, my colleague Richard Rogers at the time, another architect, Ricky Burdett. Together, we created a conscience about the quality of spaces in the centre of London. I remember with my wife Elena, we were walking past here, Horse Guards Parade, and we looked at it. I mean, this noble space was totally disfigured by parked cars, by clutter. And top left, I did a sketch which subsequently became part of a promotion movement taken up by a newspaper. And the result of that, and I'll show you a little detail in a moment, this space was totally transformed. The cars were removed. Suddenly you could see these magnificent buildings right on the edge of Whitehall. And all that happened because together we lobbied, we brought together politicians in this front row. You can see I'm on the left. Next to me is Pasqual Maragall, the mayor of Barcelona, who transformed that city through the Olympics. We worked together on a communication tower. So he was able to share his experiences in Europe. On the front line, you see the Prime Minister, Tony Blair. You can see Richard on the right. There's an important journalist. And this is just an excerpt from the newspapers at that time. This is my sketch in the top right. So really, out of galvanizing public opinion, prime movers, the power of advocacy. And that really is just a tiny glimpse behind that project. That project took years. And it's a wonderful example of democracy and the ability to be able to have a debate and finally for public opinion to galvanize around change. But just imagine if at that time there had been a consensus. Imagine if there'd been a shared values through a manifesto, a declaration, the Declaration of San Marino, of principles, which, whether you were a politician, whether you were a developer, an architect, an engineer, anybody involved in shaping the environment around us, just imagine how amazing that would be and how amazing that might be in the future. So I invite everyone who's involved in the environment, any profession, to join me in committing to this declaration and turning it into positive action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Norman. And you probably wonder why I asked at the start, who is an architect here? Because I knew architects will be looking at you like that, right? I know myself, and they would. But I wanted to see the other people in the room and their reaction, especially. You're talking about advocacy, but there are decision makers here. And I've been looking at the evolution of the way they were listening into what you were saying, including ministers like you have in front of me, and the attention grew and grew and grew more as you could show that you were implementing solutions. And I think this is the strong message that we should send from this podium as the UN. The solutions are not abstract. Solutions are not goals that we commit to. Solutions are transformation of cities on the ground. And this is probably the strongest message you want to say. You're saying that the architect has no power. So I'll come back to you on that, but I wanted to ask the other architect on this podium, and whether he agrees the architect has no power. Also, Stefano Boeri has been pushing boundaries. I would say also going vertical when normally things go horizontal, right? Putting trees on buildings. And there is one aspect of the declaration that it talks about respect for nature and natural systems and processes. And you have been taking this into your architecture. So it's a double-folded question. What is your power as an architect in transforming the city, in bringing about sustainability? What more would you need, but also how have you done it? Because Milan has also changed the approach to nature also because of your symbolic buildings. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, let me thank Norman Foster for, let's say, his amazing contribution. I think what he was saying is absolutely crucial for the future of architecture and only for the future of our life as citizens of the world. So this concept of ecology of building, it's absolutely central. We know that buildings are the leading consumer of energy and major contributor to human-induced global warming, and consuming 30 to 40% of all the energy produced and contributing basically between 60 and 75% to all CO2 emissions. And we know also that, new technological breakthroughs have made it possible for the first time in the history of our species to reconfigure our cities, starting from existing buildings. And this is, I think, the real content of this declaration. So I simply want to, let's say, to a little bit sum up from my point of view what we should do to make buildings and architecture protagonist of a great campaign to slow down global warming and relaunching sustainable development. So first, I think we know that we have to redefine the growth of our cities, confining urban growth entirely within their current boundaries. So I think this idea to let's say, to stop the consumption of natural soil and agricultural land is absolutely the first step, the first goal. Then, for sure, I am also totally in favor of what we could do in order to find a new relation with living nature. So I think that promoting reforestation and demineralization of our urban environment is super important. We know that plants are absorbing CO2. We know that plants are absorbing the poison of urban pollution. We know that plants are implementing biodiversity. We know that plants are improving our healthy conditions. So we need this. We need this not simply because we want to decorate or to improve the aesthetic quality of our city. We need plants, shrubs, everywhere. Third, I think that what also was important in Norman Foster's speech was about energy. I think it's so important to imagine a new concept of architecture where, in which homes, offices, shopping malls, factories, industrial and technology parks will be renovated or constructed to serve as both power plants and habitats. So what I mean is that we know how, today, to do buildings that will collect and generate energy locally from the sun, from the wind, from the garbage, from agriculture and forestry, from waste, from hydro and geothermal, from ocean waves. And the point is that we know how to make these buildings that act as power plants and that produce energy, enough energy to provide for their own power needs, as well as surplus energy that can be shared. And that's such an important step because it opens a new economy, a new development, a new idea of sustainable development. So, just to conclude, I think that this declaration is very important. I think that the next summit in Sharm in Egypt will and could and should be the place where to try to gather consensus from this Norman Foster kind of declaration. And basically, I think that we have three pillars. The first is the stop of consumption of natural soil and agricultural land. The second is urban forestation, it's about green. And the third is this concept of democratization of energy. So in a way, let me quote a very old friend, Jeremy Rifkin, that 20 years ago started with the idea to realize a kind of third industrial revolution, making through buildings what internet has done with our, let's say, communication devices, to transform a new technology in a democratic tool to slow down global warming and to improve the quality of our life on the planet. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Stefano, Architect Boeri. My next question is actually for the Special Envoy for Road Safety. I think, Jean, you saw a lot of what Norman showed was about traffic, but traffic is also very much related to safety of roads. And Norman also said everything comes down to cities in these cases. And a lot of the accidents, and you have the statistics, I don't, happen in cities. So my question to you is, from your role, which is really at the top of the international agenda, right? Because you're above member states, you work with member states. How can then you communicate and use the power that architects have of changing cities to tackle road safety, to make cities a safer place in any case to be. So from traffic to real safety using architects. Over to you, Jean.
Thank you, Paola. Good afternoon, everybody. My pleasure to be here and to participate to this panel. So, I mean, as Norman mentioned, for the time being, 55% of the population is living in cities. And by 2050, we'll have 70% of the population, so almost 6 billion people will live in a city. And of course, when we speak about cities from one part of the world to another part of the world, the situation is completely different. If we are talking about London, Paris, Geneva, compared to what is happening in Dakar, in some in African countries, in Nepal, in Asia, I mean, the things is fundamentally different. And I mean, clearly, if we speak about kind of old cities, I mean, they were built at a time for horse carriage. And that's why, I mean, what is fascinating is to see that when you have now new cities coming out from the desert, I mean, it's much safer, there is no traffic, there is no congestions. So, I mean, the challenge is to reassess the situation with a new way of transportation. I mean, that is why at the moment there is so much new way of transportation in modern cities. We are talking about car sharing, we are talking about trains, about underground transportation. So all that is clearly new way of transportation to adapt the situation. But I mean, if we take the figures, I mean, every year 1.3 million people die on the roads, and you have about 40 to 50 million people who are injured with a disability. Half of those figures are occurring in the cities. So, I mean, that's a fascinating question, and incidentally, it's not by case, and Norman was showing the design of the SDG. 70 SDG2 are around road safety. 3.6 with the aim to halve the number of victims by 2030, and 11.2, which is to give public transportation to any citizen around the world. So, I mean, it's timely, I mean, to address the situation and to speak about the San Marino declaration. But, I mean, I will say the declaration is important. But I will say what is very important to make sure that actions will occur behind the declaration. And I mean, it's fascinating because in a way, motoring is quite new, it's just over 100 years. I was talking about horse carriage. Now we are talking about electric car. We are talking about hydrogen. We are talking, and I mean, you can see, I mean, the revolution wherever you are in cities with electric bicycle, with e-scooter. So all that need to be regulated, readdressed. And again, we start by education. I mean, this morning we made a conference to 400 kids, and in San Marino. And incidentally, San Marino, 35,000 people, vision zero. And congratulations, by the way. But when I asked the people, the kids, to raise the hand if they were not buckling the safety belt while sitting in the back of the car, I mean, out of 400, I saw the majority, which is raising the hand, you know. So, I mean, so much needs to be done to educate population how to behave on the road. And of course, I mean, in my position, I need to speak with government, I need to speak with mayors, because, I mean, the road crashes, it's incidentally, I had an interesting discussion with the health minister in Buenos Aires last month. And we were talking about that. We were comparing COVID-19 to road safety, road crashes. And the difference, one was a pandemic which was carrying all the planet, and the other one is a silent pandemic. So if we want to address it, we need to create more awareness, we need to work together, and we need to change things.
Thank you, Jean. Thank you for reminding us also of the importance of action. And this is not a declaration that then we put in a drawer. If you saw, this declaration is, of course, to be adopted by governments, but it contains principles that are for practitioners that, Norman will sign first, and hopefully others will follow. It's a symbolic signing, but is considered like the oath of the doctor. And the oath of a doctor is very important. When you know to a doctor, you know that is likely or she's likely to do her best or his best to save your life. And this is what is meant with this declaration and the principles that also an architect, also an engineer, a surveyor, a city planner has to make an oath with himself or herself and said, okay, when I'm out there and I'm implementing all these goals, SDGs and commitments, I am doing it in this spirit. So we hope that the action will come in any case, but will be filtered by these principles. So that's really what we are hoping to do here today. Thank you also, you reminded us that what you are doing on road safety touches upon other areas. The same thing that working with nature, as Boeri mentioned, touches other areas. And we come to the issue of climate neutrality. And that's where I wanted to look at the climate mayor by, by default. And Susan, and to ask you a bit your opinion, because you have been facing the issue of climate at different levels, including the negotiations at the high level, right? So you have seen also the reality of planning for climate neutrality in your city, as well as setting the high goals for the world. And what I want to ask you is, where do architects stand in all this for you in your city? And what is your relationship? And what is the power you see they have? And how they can match your power or team up with you so that you are stronger in turning your city as well as other cities to climate neutral, climate friendly cities. Over to you.
Thank you, Paula. It's a pleasure to be here in person and in such a beautiful location as well. And the city of Glasgow has had in recent years a deepening relationship with UNECE, which has been enormously important for us. It's given us a forum for collaboration and for learning and for talking about the journey that we've been on as a city, a real transformational journey, still very much a work in progress, but which is now increasingly, as Paula was saying, defined by how we continue to transition towards being a carbon neutral city by 2030, which is a significant challenge for a major post-industrial city in the way that Glasgow is, but one which we have absolutely set our minds to, and which the kind of collaboration that you talked about, Paula, with professionals, with architects, with designers, giving politicians like me the professional, independent support, and declarations like the San Marino Declaration are an enormously important political tool as well in driving forward what is often a challenging and a not always popular policy area. So it is hugely important. And last November, of course, as Paula said, we had the honour of hosting COP26, and I hope if any of you were able to attend that you experienced the famous warm Glasgow welcome, but also did see that we are a city in transition, transition from our post-industrial past and transition towards a zero carbon future, a sustainable future as a city, but also a city that is absolutely committed to transformation, to sustainability and to social justice. Social justice being at the heart, and social and economic transformation also being at the heart of everything that we try to do in Glasgow. And being the host of COP was an enormous I mean, an opportunity of a scale that I can't, it's impossible to overestimate really how important that was for Glasgow and how much it raised our profile internationally and put us on a global map in a way that we'd never had an opportunity to be before as a city. But more importantly, it does provide us those incredibly valuable connections and incredibly valuable partnerships, and including, I had the honour to meet Lord Foster in COP, which was not just one of the highlights of that event, but possibly one of the highlights of my time as leader of the city. And it also gives me an opportunity to talk to people about what I think is actually one of modern Scotland's great success stories, although it is an ongoing and continuing story, which is the transformation of Glasgow's public realm and our communities through what in essence could be summed up as community leadership of our housing. About 20 years ago now, the city's tenants voted to transfer our municipal housing in its entirety to a network of community-led housing associations, more than 80 of them, which are led by tenants, owned by tenants, and they have been absolutely catalytic in transforming a city that had been through some incredibly difficult times, been through deindustrialisation, depopulation, and a great deal of social and economic inequality along with that. A landscape, a city realm that was scarred and was in many ways absolutely inimical to all of the things that we've talked about here today, and the things that the San Marino Declaration sets out to enshrine. It was a public realm that was unhealthy. It made people sick. It exacerbated poverty, exacerbated deprivation. And Glasgow has transformed. It is unrecognisable from the way that it was 20 years ago. The physical transformation of the city over that period, I think, is an extraordinary story, and it's one that I like to take every opportunity to tell people. That community-based housing association network has meant that essentially people, citizens, have led Glasgow's renewal, and most importantly, the citizens who were most in need, the citizens who had suffered most from that deindustrialisation process, from what was an unjust transition from Glasgow's industrial past, are the ones who have led the way in transforming the places and the homes that they live in. It hasn't been a process without difficulty. It's involved large-scale demolition, for example, which now is something we would very much think twice about, and it's been discussed during today's session already why demolition is less and less the way forward. But it was demolition of houses that previously were damaging to people and damaging to communities, and they have been replaced with homes which we insist on being built to what we call our Glasgow standard, which sets a standard for placemaking, for space standards within homes themselves, and for energy efficiency, and which we are expanding and moving forward now to also include a connection with nature, to include green space in the way that we approach planning and development. Paula asked about the role that architects and designers play, and I want to just mention Professor Brian Evans, who I'm sure many of you will know and who made a contribution to this morning's session. Brian was instrumental in bringing UNECE to Glasgow back in September 2019, when we published then and signed the Glasgow Message, which I think was a very important stepping stone on the way to the San Marino Declaration. And not long before that took place, Brian was appointed as our first ever city urbanist in Glasgow, a position that we created, and essentially put him as a designer and a landscape and ecology-led urban designer in particular, put him in a position, an advisory role with a remit to challenge, with a remit to push us beyond our comfort zone as a city, to push our boundaries when it came to sustainability, when it came to urban design that would contribute to and actually help to create a healthier city, a fairer and more equitable city, and crucially, a net zero city as we head towards that. And the next stage in the work that Brian has done, and I should say that he, of course, many of you will know, was the author of the UN report recently, the action plan which Lord Foster illustrated as well. But he's also produced for Glasgow a place commission which is about to be launched in the next couple of weeks, be published in the next couple of weeks. And its content still belongs to Brian. He spoke a little bit about it this morning, so I don't want to give too much away. But it really takes us to the next level. It builds on that journey that Glasgow has already undertaken with our housing stock and with our community-led housing associations, and thinks about community leadership of place as a whole, not just homes, but the places that they are in as well. It really takes us to that next stage in understanding that place is a catalyst for transformation, a catalyst for not just regeneration of the physical environment of the city, but also regeneration of social and economic opportunities and life chances for people as well. It's become very clear in the journey that we've been on that while we haven't yet solved all of Glasgow's social and economic problems, far from it, we continue to live with the very deep legacies of our past. What we have been able to do is provide with security and comfort and health in the places that people live, a basis then for being able to go in the next stage to transform life chances, particularly for children and young people who now have access to homes and places that their parents and their grandparents really could only dream of. So that Place Commission, when it's published in the next couple of weeks, and I've been lucky to have a preview of it, will align incredibly closely with the San Marino Declaration. The themes in it, the principles in it, I think are remarkably resonant. And the fact that the two of those come so closely together will allow me as a city leader to push that a bit further. It gives me that evidence base, that independent evidence base, signed up to not just in Glasgow, but reinforced globally by a global organisation like UNECE, with all of the stakeholders who are involved in that. That's an incredibly powerful tool. It's an incredibly powerful basis for continuing that transformation. With the help and support of our friends at UNECE, we certainly in Glasgow stand ready to embrace that San Marino Declaration, to embed it not just in policy but in practice, to transform aspirations into delivery, and that is the most important thing. We can sign up to policies, we can sign up to declarations, but the crucial thing is to actually embed them in the way that we work, and to evidence them in the lives that our citizens end up leading. That's the jump that we need to make, that's the transformation that we need to make, and certainly I'm very excited and looking forward to the next stage in Glasgow's journey with our own Place Commission, with the San Marino Declaration standing foursquare behind us. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Susan. And actually, listening to you speaking here at our committee makes us understand even once more how it is important to work with mayors for us. Because it's just through this partnership between governments and local authorities that really can advance the sustainability agenda. So thank you for being here. Last but not least is our chair. I left you at the end because like you're used to us, but I'm going to ask you a strange question because, well, we heard a lot about power, right? About the power architects, lack of, but what is your power as a civil servant that is working in any case at the international level and at the national level? And how are you using, or you intend to use more, and I'm using the word use in quotes, practitioners, because so far there has been a gap between what, the work of governments and authorities and what was happening on the ground and the role of architects. So what is your vision and how you do it also on a daily basis? Over to you.
Thank you, Paula, and thank you for the opportunity that you gave me as a chair to share also my own opinion and not just this formality of communication. I would like to start with saying that, I am a public servant, but since many years I have been engaged in housing. So I cannot escape not to speak about housing. And not only that, but even in my previous life as professional, I started as an architect and I worked on some housing projects. So the heart of my professional life is very much related and connected to housing. However, I have seen that housing is, politically, is not part of EU mandate. So it is left to national governments. National governments consider housing a local responsibility, while local governments very often leave this responsibility to people to solve their housing problems. And this is not just because of ideological beliefs that individuals and people are able to choose based on their choice and preferences, but this is not also just because lack of funding or lack of capacities. It's because perhaps housing is not considered as a public interest, since it is consumed individually. So each family is housed in a house, and it is not perceived as a public interest. And this is our challenge, how to make this housing policy, to bring it from the individual responsibility into local, national, and international attention. And first, we have to accept that housing is a basic need, and that's why it is one of the elements of human rights included into the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Second, it is a public interest. It is because its lack or inadequacy generates health problems, social distress, safety and security risks. Not to mention also the environmental problems that were several times was mentioned this afternoon. Therefore, from individual problem that a family might have with housing, it is transformed into a society problem and into a public interest. Not only, but governments are there as responsible organisms for the well-being of each individual of the society. And this brings me to the second point that I want to make, that we have to focus on people-centered policies, which is also mentioned in the San Marino Declaration. And people at the center and people-centered housing. When we think of housing, we think of people that are living inside and the life that they are doing there. But this is not the case in many big and growing cities, where the residential sector is considered just and only for profitable investment, so as a profitable investment. And the way how these cities are developed today are increasingly distinguished by the production of extremes. A high-density developed city center with corporate buildings, some very often lifeless, that become empty, and a growing suburb from those that are expelled from the center, in the name of revitalization, renovation, redevelopment, or modernization. The most beautiful cities today have their origin in ages when people settled together and started to build their houses, streets, and everything that was needed for their way of living in different time lapse. The city, as global as it may be today, belongs to its inhabitants, and planners, architects, and public administrators are there to serve the interests of the people. And there is a strong call for uplifting the policies that put people at the center, and in particular in housing. And I see the Declaration of San Marino as a way how to stimulate and how to raise awareness, in this case, of practitioners, and the connections that should be established more or strengthened between policymakers and practitioners. 1 week before coming here, I had a workshop that I organized in the university where I teach with the students on a topic that is developed by UNECE and ITU on smart sustainable cities. And I noticed that students are not so much aware on the linkages and how digital technology can be a tool for planning. So it is more connected with the building as such, so intelligent building, but not so much with planning. So I think that there is a big opportunity that we as mentors of the young generation to transmit these principles of declaration, San Marino Declaration, but also with the Association of Architects and Planners to be part of the oath, as you mentioned, of architects and other practitioners. So this is more or less what I wanted to share with you.
Thank you, Doris, very much. People-centered. The declaration also speaks of people's smartness. We have heard too many times it's smart, 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 and smart was at the end IT, forgetting that behind the IT technology we have people. So people-centered, people smartness is essential. Before I go with another quick round of questions and then we open for questions and might come from the floor, I wanted to ask Norman to take us what is highlights from this panel. Over to you.
I think the highlight for me is that a group coming from such diverse backgrounds, from politician, public servant, as you, Madam Chair, described yourself, pioneer of motorsport turned diplomat, architect, the kind of common voice I find really impressive. And I think it would almost be a separate topic to take housing, because I think that is, along with energy, is absolutely critical in terms of the future of cities. I think the real challenge is the emphasis on translating the manifesto into action and moves to push it into action, and somehow to bring words alive. I mean, just to share one anecdote, perhaps very insightful for me, working with the team at the UNECE, the Forum of Mayors, and making, as we had discussions about how do we make the forum more, how do we make it more influential? How do we encourage the sharing of information between cities, and how do we acknowledge the extraordinary power for good of civic leaders? And out of that conversation came the proposition that perhaps at the next, which was the last forum of mayors, instead of the mayors coming with a speech, that they would make a presentation with before and after photographs to show an intervention in their city which had improved the quality of life for the citizens in a sustainable manner. And I think the results were really so encouraging because there was an obvious pride as mayor after mayor would show a variety of, share visually their experiences. So I'm enormously encouraged by this panel, by the declaration, and by personal experiences through that.
Thank you very much, Norman. I suggest the following. I am going to ask the same question to all the panels, so you have the time to think, and then we will take a few minutes also to see if there are questions from the audience. I have to remind you that we will have to adopt the declaration today, and I know there are a few comments on it, so we will also have the time to show it on the screen and make the necessary amendments before we adopt it. We have heard a lot about what either you have done or you would like to do, and my question is, what is a thing, though, that you would like to see changed that will facilitate your job, at whatever level you are, whether you are the special envoy or you're an architect working on the ground, you're working in ministry. What is the thing that really is your main impediment to succeed, not only in implementing the declaration, but when it comes to do your job in a sustainable way and promoting sustainability? Because we talk a lot about the goals, but we never talk about what can't we get there, what is the obstacle that we have on the road that we really would like to be removed. I know that there are a lot of obstacles and we have to remove them and jump over them, or, but what is the one that you really would like to see out of the way? And I start from Jean, that it's always been in his previous life, he was very good in avoiding obstacles and going fast. What will make you faster this time if you didn't have that obstacle?
I will say it's not an easy question, because it's so different from one place to another one, So I think the first good news is that we know there is a problem and we are addressing the problem. So clearly the problem should be endorsed, and that's probably also the big news with the San Marino declaration, that we are able to address this declaration all around the world and make sure that people will answer on that and will commit on that. We need a commitment, but we don't need only a political commitment. We need a commitment from any person which is involved. And that's why it is interesting, to have a representation of a public sector, of a private sector, because it's something where we do all have a responsibility if we want things to change and if we want things to improve. And, it's very important to know that, we were talking about the number of victims, and 90% of those numbers are occurring in low and middle income countries. And that's where the problem mainly is. When you see all the progress which have been done to make life safer in Europe, for example, but most of the countries outside, in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, are 30 to 50 years behind it. So, how can we make sure that everybody is going to catch that? And that is absolutely the challenge. And that will be already my recommendation to help and also to support. I think the low and middle income countries need more support.
Thank you, Jean, for this. I'm going to ask Stefano next to you to answer the same question.
Well, I generally believe that we have to stop thinking to ecological transition as a forced and difficult response to a threat. So I as if it were, let's say, a necessary choice to avoid a catastrophe, which is partially true, but it's also absolutely true that ecological transition it's an amazing opportunity. It's an amazing opportunity to improve the quality of our life. So what we could do, changing our diet, making our habitat greener, using electric vehicles to reduce pollution, breathing clean air and so on, improving also the quality of our economical development. It's a choice, it's a positive choice. It's something that we should start to communicate with, not be something that we have to do to avoid the catastrophe, but something that we love to do to improve the life of our species on the planet.
Thank you, and I'm glad to see that obstacles are seen often as opportunities, so hopefully that's also our approach to the challenges ahead. Susan, what about you? What is the biggest obstacle?
I suppose it wouldn't be a surprise to hear a politician say that I want more power and more money. But genuinely, I think the thing that stands in our way at a city level, and particularly a sort of medium-sized city like Glasgow rather than a global mega city, is the ability to get the right levels of investment in to deliver the scale of change that we need to deliver at the pace that we need to deliver it at, and also to have the levers at city level that we need to do that. And I mean, I think that is fixable. It's fixable by national governments understanding that it will be cities, by and large, who will deliver more quickly. By and large, cities have more ambitious targets for decarbonisation than national governments do. We are trying to go faster. Investment in cities and devolving the levers of power to cities will be what will help us to respond to the climate emergency at a pace that recognises that it's an emergency, which is much more challenging for national governments to do, although they could if they tried harder. But cities, I think, are generally more fleet of foot. And I know certainly we know what we need to do. We understand it. We've got the technology. We've got the political will. We've got the partnerships. We need the resource and we need the power to be able to deliver it.
Thank you, Susan. I'm turning to my left and asking the same question this time. The main obstacle, although I know that you overcame all the obstacles that you had ahead of you, but still, I know that it's not always easy, right? So,
if we want action, then the court of public opinion is also quite important. So, I think through this panel and the events of this week and the declaration, there are powerful, good words, but the stepping stone to action is getting those good words out. And I'm reminded of a conversation that Susan Aitken and I with John Kerry had when the first day we had a breakfast of mayors in your town hall. And you were the host for that event. And afterwards, I remember getting the statistics from your group that breakfast conversation about cities, sustainability, climate change had reached over 1 billion people. I mean, that was really quite astounding, I found. So I think the There are many obstacles, perhaps human nature. There's an aversion to change. It's natural. And interestingly, when positive change does take place, the memory is very short, and that's absorbed and kind of taken for granted. So I think that, that we have a responsibility here today, collectively and individually, to get those important messages out there into the wider domain. There are many misunderstandings. Over lunch, we had a conversation about energy and the statistics of energy. And that's another conversation. But there are so many myths, there are so many misunderstandings. So really, getting down to the truth and getting the truth out there, I think, is important.
Thank you very much, Norman. And actually, it's interesting that the word outreach and the word action came out so many times, because this is really what we are trying to do with the declaration today. I shall remind you that architects here will be the first ones to sign symbolically off. Norman will be first, but then we count very much on local chapters all over the world to share this declaration, so that we will reach again the billions through the power of sharing and outreach. Please go ahead.
I mean, just triggering a thought, it's the designers can design in an ecologically responsible manner, but also the cities themselves, those who purchase, those who are at the receiving end, they too should be setting the standards in terms of whether that's street furniture, whether it's energy, whether it's controlling waste. So it's not just those who design, it's those who have the purchasing power. That's another, for me, really important dimension.
Thank you, Norman. I'm sorry for my cough. I'm going to now, before we take the declaration on the screen, I wanted to leave the floor open for those of you, because I've seen people giving me sign that they had questions. So please, if you have questions, raise your hand, push the button on your microphone, tell us to whom your question is addressed, unless it's addressed to all the panelists. And we will give you the floor. I mean, we will give you the floor if we see you're waving. Otherwise, just press the button, ask the question. No questions from the audience. Okay, very good. Then we were exhaustive. I'm not going to go for another round of questions, but I would like to keep you all here, because you're going to be the first ones to sign on to this poster that appeared miraculously next to Susan at the end of the event. I will ask now my colleagues to please join me over here, Hannah, if you might. And then we will project the text of the declaration. I know, Norman, you had a slight change you wanted to propose, which we make, right? You wanted to add city managers in general, if I'm not wrong?
Yes. Essentially, civic leaders and those who exercise the power over the environment. So it's not just those who design, it's those who administrate. It's the city managers. So it's really everybody bonding by common assent and signing up to the same humanitarian, ecological values.
Thank you, Norman. So I see you see there. I think we are modifying developers. We are modifying, I think, para 5, which will text engineers, urban planners, designers, surveyors, and building and city managers, and developers around the world too. You will see
all those involved with shaping the environment.
those you will see the changes reflected. You will see them here. Building city map, comma, developer and developers. If you have other changes, I recall that there were a few others that were proposing changes, including. You want to no? Okay, okay. I'm going to let you, yes? Can you speak in the microphone, otherwise we don't hear you. City managers, no comma, and developers.
Yes, because it's city managers and developers.
Correct. If there are no more changes, then I'll give it back to the chair. And you go back to being the chair, because you will have to take us through adoption of the document. Now, I just want to make sure there are no flags raised, because after that we cannot change it anymore. So it's set in stone.
Thank you, Paula. Okay, we will show on the screen the text. We will pass slowly that you can check and read. And if no comments, then that is adopted.
I'm not reading it. No.
So the first paragraph is approved or adopted as it is, as you see it. Then we pass to the second paragraph. So second paragraph, point A. I don't see any, so we pass paragraph point B. No comment. Point C. No comment. Point D. No comment. Point C. No comment. So point 2 is adopted. Point 3. Adopted. Point 4. A and B. Adopted. Point C. Adopted. So point 4 is adopted. Point 5, we have the amendments as it is on the screen. Agreed and adopted. Point A and B. So point 5 is adopted with the amendments. Point 6 and paragraph A, B, paragraph C, paragraph D, paragraph E, Yeah. Okay, paragraph F. Paragraph G. Go down, please. Paragraph H. Paragraph I. Paragraph J. And paragraph K. Yes, I see United States.
Hello. So just since there aren't any comments, just maybe, and that my comment isn't actually on the substance of the declaration, but perhaps to help the translators when they're translating this into the other languages later, at several points in the declaration it says we support circular homes, and it might be a good idea for the Secretariat to have a definition of what we mean by circularity and not literally a home that is a circle. So there aren't any issues in the translations that come up later. So it's not a comment on the substance, but for ease of interpretation later.
Yeah, which point exactly is that? C, you mean point C?
There's a few places that just say
Resource efficiency and circularity.
So number 1 and number 4A both say circular homes, and circularity I think is fine on its own, but where it says circular homes,
I can't hear well.
Yeah, we don't need to change the substance at all. This is just maybe for the Secretariat to put a note for the translators before they translate it.
Can I? Yes. Thank you. Actually, I think also in English sounds strange, no? Because circular homes, you think a home that is circular, but you want to say homes that are built according to circularity concepts.
Right. I mean, the difference isn't context.
Should we modify that and say homes built according to circularity concepts?
That works. It
Yeah.
also clears up the ambiguity.
No?
Or encourage circularity in homes, urban infrastructure.
Yeah, actually, I think Norman has a better suggestion. Encourage circularity.
To encourage circularity in homes, urban infrastructure and cities. To encourage circularity.
Yeah. So we said that verb. What
To
is it?
encourage circularity in homes, urban infrastructure and cities.
And encouraging
And to encourage.
Well, I think it's.
I'm encouraging.
Yeah, because you see here it's bolstering
Okay, so
and encouraging.
I'm encouraging
Yep.
circularity
Yeah.
in homes,
In homes. In homes. Yeah. That be okay? Yeah. We just don't want buildings that are round.
So is it correct now? So we, yes,
Yes, point number 5, if we include developers...
can you introduce yourself because we cannot see the plates?
Sorry, Giulio De Carli, OneWorks. If we consider developers at point number 5, we should maybe consider infrastructures operators like railways, airports, highways, transportation in general.
After developers, comma,
After developers, right.
including, so we delete and?
No, yes,
Yeah.
developers and,
And
infrastructures developers, operators.
infrastructure operators? you said?
Operators.
And infrastructure only operators.
You could just say and developers and operators.
Then and operators, sorry.
And operators.
Yeah, well, no infrastructure. Yeah. Yeah.
He wants to highlight the,
Sorry?
he wants to highlight the bridges and the roads.
And operators of infrastructure.
So, Giulio, do you want to put infrastructure operators or operators of infrastructures or only operators?
Operators is fine.
It's fine, okay.
Excuse me. We need infrastructure operators to include utilities, wastewater, facilities and so on, and these are very big, nuclear facilities and so on. Thank you.
Do we leave it back, infrastructure operators or not? Or you prefer to keep just operators that is larger and more inclusive?
Maybe better infrastructure operators.
Better infrastructure operators? Spiro
Yes.
as well? Okay.
Yes.
Yes? Yeah, absolutely. Please, yeah. So we,
yes.
I leave it to you.
Only a small remark. I don't see, because we have point C, and we therefore in 5, I don't see the mayors above. The mayors at C.
Start with mayors and civic leaders.
We put mayors and civic leaders there. And the C, you start with mayors and civic leaders.
If there was not the therefore, there would have been no problem. But as you have therefore...
No, not there, down
Same.
on C. Who is typing here that I don't see the person typing? Who? I don't know who is typing, so I don't know who to address myself to.
Yeah, they are behind. They are behind.
Ah, there, okay, yeah.
The other side of the window.
Mayors and civic leaders. And civic leaders. And civic leaders. Hannah, can you go and do this, please? And type it up. Thank you. Civic leaders. Yeah, great. Please go. Yeah, please. Please.
So, yeah, you have to.
Yep.
Yes, please. Yes. Anton.
Yes, I find this not only a fascinating panel discussion, but it's also, the corrections are also indicating very interesting aspects about the built environment. And I think in questions in section C, we're looking at the creative driving force. And of course, mayors, civic leaders, but it could also be expanded, but I won't go into that. The number 5 is where I find it particularly interesting because it began with a list of people, mayors, architects, surveyors, engineers, and little by little we're adding people who have an impact on the built environment. And this is one of those threads that we could extend even beyond, because I would ask, what about the lenders? What about banks? What about insurance agencies? What about pension funds? Because they are the ones who are the motor behind the ideas and the plans. So for number 5, rather than trying to list every single person, every utility, every infrastructure, perhaps we could list the main ones and then have a more broad phrase such as all of those who are participating in any phase of development or building or influencing our built environment. Because I think there are many, many more people, many, many more agents, and we could be here making a very long list and always leaving someone out. So I would suggest that we use specifics as examples and then a broader categorization for all those other fields that have an impact on our built environment. Thank you.
Okay. Paola, you wanted to comment?
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I'm afraid that there's a bit of a risk here of reopening the whole thing. When this text was prepared, it was very clear we are looking at those have a direct physical impact. And everybody has an impact on the city. Then this declaration should be for everybody. But we wanted to limit the category to those that operate directly on the territory, on the city, in a physical way, and have the power to modify it. I understand there are insurance companies, but that's a different category. We don't want to include it in this one. That at least was not the intent. And I'm afraid if we do it, we water down the power of this declaration, which is addressed really to practitioners that say they have the pencil in their hand, so to speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Paola. Okay, so shall we revise the texts that were already amended?
Can we have the text, please?
On the screen, please. So item 5, paragraph 5, it's adopted as it is revised. And since we passed all the text, now I think we can adopt it, the whole text, with the revised paragraph. Well, the Declaration of San Marino is adopted.
Congratulations.
Can I mention what we'll I don't know if you have something to read, otherwise we will proceed with the cameraman taking pictures of the signing, and then we have the press conference at 6.
No, the San Marino is adopted. I don't have anything else here.
Can I then?
Yeah. Yes, Paola.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. So we have done our duty for today. Now, we are going to ask first Norman Foster to approach the principles and sign them symbolically. We have, I think, the photographer. Let's not do it to the photographer and the cameraman. It will be followed by those on this podium. And then we are asking all of you that are architects, engineers, practitioners to also come forward and sign it. But we will do it orderly. At least we'll try to do it orderly. So that the camera and whoever takes pictures will have an opportunity to take proper pictures, because we talk about outreach. That's what we want to do with these pictures. We want to make sure that you use them on your social media and we spread the word also beyond this room. So I'm going to approach there with Norman and then we'll follow. I think someone had the marker. I don't have it, so I will kindly ask the person with the marker to give me the marker. Is there? And those that have to take pictures to approach, including probably Thomas and those that are in our, and of course Doris. Yes, so for those, there are some that were going to follow us in the press conference. The press conference is in person here in this building, in this room at 6 o'clock. And all of you are invited by the government of San Marino and Minister Canti here in front of me, a reception gala hosted by the government at 7 o'clock. Also in this building, you don't need to go around, it's just one floor down. And you will have a beautiful view while enjoying some San Marino wine and food. So we look forward to seeing you there.